Well, for more on the BRICS summit in Russia, I'm joined now on the line from London by the European Affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. So an attempt at this summit, we've talked about this briefly previously, an attempt to find alternative ways to supplant or supplement the dollar as a means of moving money around the world. What's your sense of what the issue is with the dollar here? What is Vladimir Putin and others hoping to achieve with this attempt to de-dollarize international trade?
It's a very, very important move. It is, in fact, the most significant move the BRICS could make short of outright war. For decades now, America has been the only currency, the dollar, because the pound, essentially after World War II, Britain was too weak to carry on, because previously it was the pound. And on that basis, it's not just international trade, but it's everywhere. The dollar is, as a result, American influence throughout. By not supplementing the dollar, but outright rivalry with the dollar is the key point here. It means that there really would be a new world order in the sense the world would be split into dollar and non-dollar nations. It is relatively easy to set up such a system. It could be based, for example, on the European ECU. And therefore, all that's needed is willpower. And the key nation in this is actually China. When China decides to go ahead with this, then from that point onwards, the dollar will not be the only currency, and as a result, American influence, and so the influence of the West will fall.
And I mean, is it fair to say that, particularly for Russia, this is an alternative way to maintain trade in the face of geopolitical escalations?
Quite right. It is actually Russia which will be one of the key beneficiaries almost immediately. By controlling the dollar, America, in effect, has an influence, at the very least, and arguably a control over world trade, over sanctions. But now, if we go forward into a world in which there's a separate currency, that no longer is the case. At that point, Russia, as you rightly say, will find that the sanctions are close on to a joke. In any case, if China were to make this step, it would mean it will come into the open as an ally of Russia, instead of being a kind of semi-ally at best. And that in its own right will be a significant move, because anyone who joined this trade bloc, the non-dollar one, would automatically in some way therefore be, if not on Putin's side, at least not against him. And therefore Russian influence, and above all, the notion that Russia is some sort of beleaguered country, would simply, the beleaguered aspect would fall, and Russian influence also would go up as a result.
Well, I mean, obviously this process will take time to be realized. I suppose the problem for these countries is that though trade with other BRICS countries is important, I mean, it does not constitute all trade, or even a majority of the trade that a country, for example, like South Africa or Brazil has, does it?
No. It is important to realize that this is as much a political decision as economic. You see, as you rightly say, the world trade is not, in fact, just held by these nations. The West is, of course, and primarily America, is a huge and important trading partner. And this is what has been restraining China. It is ultimately a political decision to do this, because short of declaring outright war, it's second only to that, in the sense it would mean that China is saying to America and the West, it's no longer part of them in any shape or form. And this is, of course, means that China would suffer economically, and the other nations to some respect, if America took counteraction. But if the political will was there, then it would be a rival to the dollar and would be very important, especially for Russia.
I suppose, Dr. Laskiewicz, that it is important to keep in mind that beyond Russia and possibly China, there are diverse perspectives within BRICS, meaning that no single country within BRICS has the ability to always have their way. So countries like Brazil, India, and South Africa often play an important moderating role within decision-making in BRICS, which helps to make it far less revolutionary, doesn't it?
Well, yes, in some ways, I agree. What you're really saying is that owing to the fact that Russia and China can't always get their way, it's not going to be as outright a rival as the Soviet bloc was in the days of the Cold War. True. It also, however, is one of the nicer aspects of BRICS for many of these countries because literally they have very little influence what America decides or does not decide. And here in this BRICS, they have a chance, so to speak, to play. It's one of the games in town, which certainly G7 or G8 isn't. I therefore say that although you are correct, the key point is by setting up this kind of trading bloc, it is in its own right a sort of rival from the start, and it depends on China just how far it would go.
Well, I mean, beyond, of course, what we mentioned earlier, Vladimir Putin clearly, sees this as a way of showing to the international world that he is not isolated. But let's just get away from BRICS for a moment, but staying in Russia, because there's been a development in that rumbling investigation into the 2010 plane crash in Russia that killed the Polish president, Lech Kaczynski. And of course, you have Polish roots. So I wonder whether they'll ever uncover the truth about that plane crash.
Well, I have to state that having written a book and a report on this point and being interested in taking the case to The Hague or the Strasbourg, I have to say that, in my opinion, there is, as a result, a way of arriving at the answer. And the problem is the answer points quite clearly at Russia. Of course, Russia does not want this and has set up a very well done counter report, which is the official report at present for the world. The interesting aspect is now what's happening in Poland. What has happened is the current regime has decided to pillory and, in fact, or prosecute the people of a third report, if you like, done by the previous regime, pointing out that it too asserted that Russia was responsible. This is all the stranger because, in effect, by doing so, they're supporting Russia's case about this being a catastrophe and not, in fact, an act of murder, as I and the previous regime assert. And also, what is odd about it is, why, if they're on Ukraine's side, have they picked this moment in the war, which incidentally could turn out to be a vital time because Russia is slowly pressing forward and now has, of course, the North Korean troops as well, to stay on Russia's side about this whole report. It is a strange action and kind of worrying because Poland is such a key ally for Ukraine, it being, of course, the main conduit for the arms. And so, therefore, it is of interest to the rest of the world just how this will develop.
Dr. Marek, as always, thank you ever so much. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is a European affairs analyst who was talking to me on the line there from London. You're watching Arise News Hour. Plenty more to come. Stay with us.